Hello and welcome to the brand new American Reformation podcast. We long to see the wider American Christian church fall more in love with Jesus by learning from the practices of the early church and other eras of discipleship multiplication. We want to hear from you. Make sure you comment and leave a review wherever you're watching or listening to tell us what God is doing in your life or how you feel about today's conversation. Lord, have your way in us. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the American Reformation Podcast. Tim Allman here with my good friend, Nick Price. Nick is a senior pastor at Trinity Lutheran Church, a multi-site congregation in the Chicago area. And Trinity's mission, I love this, is to help people look, live, and love more like Jesus. Nick has an amazing story of being raised up into leadership in the local church, and you're going to get to hear that today. But more than that, and he is loved by an awesome wife. You married up. Jenny is amazing. They have 3 kids, and they live in Lisle, Illinois. So this is going to be fun. Nick, standard question on American Reformation. How are you praying that the church in America experiences Reformation in this post-Christian, crazy age in which we find ourselves living and doing ministry?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Good to be on. Yeah, my prayer when it comes to Reformation is that the church would better posture itself to reach a pagan culture. And what I mean by that is sometimes we use pagan in a derogatory term. That's not the way I mean it. It's just, I feel like we have a lot more in common today with the early church than ever before. We just live in a society where there's so many different philosophies and religions and ways of going about life. And I think it's actually really an exciting opportunity. And I just want to see the church get excited about that opportunity, because this is the time when we can really have conversations about purpose and life and meaning, and people want to have those conversations, and we can have those conversations, I think, in fresh ways that help us maybe re-examine assumptions that we honestly haven't had to, examine for centuries, because we kind of lived in a very Christianized world, at least in the West. So I'm really excited that we have this opportunity now to dive into some of these conversations, and my heart is to see the church really embrace where we are here in America as a new mission field, and find the joy that comes with joining Jesus in that and following where he leads.
It's so discombobulating, I think, for the longtime Christian who's been in a Christian culture to even talk. Have you heard of the conversation around centered set, bounded set, directional set Christianity? I'm doing a lot of thinking through this and how in the early church, especially in Acts 15, and then you've got Paul in Athens and Corinth, et cetera, and it appears as if directional set, people are on the way to Jesus. And what the church said, Nick, in Acts 15, Jerusalem Council, is that the Holy Spirit is at work among the Gentiles. We have no doubt of it. We've seen it. There's been, Acts 10, there's been a falling upon the Gentiles of the Holy Spirit, confessing Jesus as a crucified and risen one. And yet they were still in, you use pagan or Gentile culture. So let me just throw this out to you. This is kind of a mind bend. Could a Muslim come to faith in Jesus and declare Jesus as Lord, and yet still have some of the cultural underpinnings connecting them to their Muslim roots? Same for a Hindu or some other kind of, they come to, this is kind of crazy gray area, but I think we have to go there if we're going to really reach those who have been in a different culture than the American Western Judeo-Christian culture. Thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a great question. My undergraduate degree was actually in Islamic studies, so I spent a lot of time kind of wrestling with that.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, but this is what's beautiful about Christianity. Christianity, when we follow Jesus, unlike other religions, which are very bound to kind of a particular culture, like take Islam, for example, you can't truly read the scriptures in Islam unless you read them in Arabic. To be a Hindu means to be born into a caste system. Like, it's just, they're really grounded in a culture. Christianity is transcultural. I mean, you get to Revelation 7:9, and it's this gorgeous picture of people from every tribe, tongue, and nation worshiping before the throne and before the Lamb. So in one sense, they can still have some of their cultural underpinnings. One of the things I love about many Muslim societies, high value on family, high value on community, high value on things like justice and care for the poor. Those are great things that are gorgeous and beautiful. At the same time, they're going to be challenged also by the gospel, right? Because in Islam, it's about upholding the 5 pillars and following all of God's rules and laws and commandments and seeing God as one, not 3. Jesus is going to challenge that and say it's grace. You can't save yourself. God is this beautifully relational being in a Trinity. I mean, there's certain things that will have to be left behind, certain assumptions that we all have to give up. And it was the same with Paul, right? The Gentiles did have to stop doing certain things. You don't keep worshiping in the temple of Aphrodite. You just don't do that. But at the same time, you don't have to somehow become culturally Jewish to be a part of the kingdom of God. You get to be a part of this family called the church. And so I would say yes and no, and I think, and that's why it's fun to be where we're at. We live in such a diverse country. The mission field is so right. When I was working in international student ministry, we said one of the blessings that we have is God is sending the nations to us on our campuses. And we just have this incredible opportunity to experience Pentecost, like every day. And that's really fun, and so I'd say, there's always going to be, there's this beautiful mosaic that comes where we bring our cultural gifts into the kingdom, but there's also ways in which we do leave some things behind as we find our primary identity in Christ and his grace. So
good. So what part of your past story, Nick, shapes the way you view leading the church today? Because your background, you got to your spot in a unique way. And you've written for us in the United Leadership Collective about how, maybe there are other ways to be formed, but your church sent you off to seminary. So just tell a little bit of that story and how it shapes the way you lead as a lead pastor in 2023.
Yeah. I think there's two kind of threads there. One thing from my background that it shapes how I lead is I wasn't raised in the church. I mean, I wasn't raised as a Christian. I came to faith when I was 18. And so when people talk about multiple generations of pastors in the Lutheran, I'm not that. Sorry. I mean, I don't think there's a Lutheran in my family bloodline anywhere. So I'm bringing some diversity, I guess, to the church body for my Scottish background. But I've never lost that heart for skeptical people because I was one. And I still kind of try to keep that inner skeptic alive in my head to a certain degree because I love the questions that skeptics ask. I love walking with people through that journey of doubt and trying to find answers and rediscovering the beauty of Jesus. So for me as a leader, I want other people to see conversations with those who don't hold the same basic assumptions as a gift and a joy and an opportunity. So that's a passion that I have when it comes to leading. The other side to my story, though, that you alluded to is that I came into church leadership through the local church. I was just a dude in the pew. And
I love it.
And one of the things that my pastor did for me was he was actually doing a series on comparing Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Wow. And somebody told him about my background and said, why don't you have Nick come in and you can bounce ideas off him. And so we're talking and he's like, so with Islam, is it like this? And I was like, no, it's more like this. And he's like, what about this? And I was like, no, it's more like that. And he's just like, I tell you what, do you just want to preach this weekend? I was like, what? And he's just like, well, I mean, you work in campus ministry. I mean, you've probably prepared a message before. You want to preach? I'll let you preach. You just run the manuscript by me. I was like, sure. So then that weekend I got up and I preached 4 services and he's like, you want to do that once a month? And I was like, can I? And he's like, yeah. He's like, let's just prep it together. We'll work it through together.
Wow.
And then he was having me lead small groups and lead leadership training and more. And eventually got to this point where I felt this strong urge, like God was really prompting me to really invest in the local church, to move out of campus ministry and get plugged into what we were doing here at Trinity. and sat down with him. I was like, I don't even know if there's a job available. And he's just like, well, this is great because I wanted to offer you a job. And they brought me on staff. They sent me to seminary. They paid for our journey to go down there. They brought us back. I was a site pastor here. So I love when local churches can raise up local leaders. And one of the things that I think is so cool in the book of Acts is how over and over again, the leadership that they found wasn't that they rode off to, Antioch or Jerusalem and be like, hey, do you have like a recent grad? It was who in your community right now has God raised up as a leader? And then they would support those leaders and equip those leaders and encourage those leaders. And I was just like, I just think it's such a beautiful model because the people know you know the people. And there's this encouragement to develop you in context. Because development is great, education is great, formal theological training is great. But I think where it really starts to run well is when you can do that in context and do that in community. So,
man, I love that story. I don't think we fully grappled with the radical change in culture and that we need to look at the book of Acts with fresh eyes and how it was so much about local leaders being raised up. And it was not just about leadership and discipleship multiplication. It was about church multiplication. Just check this one out from Acts chapter 16. Was reading through this past week. And this is Timothy joining Paul and Silas in their missionary journey. Timothy gets circumcised, actually, which is another conversation. Then they, right after that, verse 4 of Acts 16, they went on their way through the cities. They delivered to them for observance and decisions what had been reached by the apostles and elders who were in Jerusalem. This is referring back to the Jerusalem Council, Acts 15. So the churches were strengthened. This is it. The churches were strengthened in the faith, and they increased in numbers daily. This was a big aha for me recently. It wasn't that just the disciples were increased and multiplied. It was that churches were spontaneously starting. So I say that all the way to get back, Nick, unless the local church is taking responsibility for identifying leaders, not just for the Trinity Lisles or the Christ Greenfields, but for starting new ministry, unless we're focusing on raising up indigenous leaders to go into their, places where they work and play, and what are we doing? It was this spontaneous release of leaders and churches, word and sacrament ministry taking place in those spaces. And I don't think necessarily we're in many mainline American denominations, we're really wrestling with how out of control, Nick, it was. Right?
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the things, like in my story, we did go down, to a residential school, and I'm grateful for the education I got there. I'm grateful for the friends that I made there, who I still have today. But I will also be honest about, there was another side to that story, which is it was very disorienting, especially for my family. It's like what's our church home? Oh, well, you're assigned to a field ed congregation. That may or may not work out. And honestly, it was hard, especially, our initial assignment was just not, it was a tough environment where we just felt like we didn't have a home, for the 3 years when we should really be getting invested in the life of the local church. So, and it took a lot of heartache and a little bit of counseling to kind of get through that, and to really find a community where we were being nurtured in the faith. So I just wish it wasn't one or the other.
Yes.
That it wasn't like to get this theological thing, you have to be totally dislocated from a community. Or if you want the community, then you're not going to get as quality formation and training. It's like, I just think that's a false dichotomy. And I have to believe that if the early church could figure that out, and churches around the world are currently figuring it out, we can figure it out too. I mean, I have confidence in God's people that there are ways that we can do that.
Yeah, the way often we theologically justify the sending away before you launch is whoever will not leave father and mother is unworthy of me.
But
I've even read some. I know it's out of context. Totally,
it's Jesus is saying that about following him. It's not about joining a denomination or going to a school. So like, let's be good exegetes here and say that's about your relationship with Jesus. And yes, there is a "here I am, send me" posture. And we had that, and that's why we went, because we were told if you want to do, and we were like, okay, we recognize that's kind of, but I don't feel like that was a choice that had to be made.
Right.
If that makes sense.
I can go down this path all day long. People get annoyed with it. So I'm just going to move on and just say they didn't have residential education for 700 years. We know the history on the education system. Until the monastic movement hit about 700 years, there was no formal send me there before I do ministry. It was all one-on-one and small group discipleship. So let's talk discipleship. How do you define that word? It's such a churchy word. We're about multiplying disciples. And sometimes, honestly, I'm sensitive to those who are outside of the Christianese, even as I use that word. So how do you talk about and define discipleship, Nick?
The best definition that I've heard even today is I've totally taken it from Mike Breen. I love that he said what a disciple is just a learner. So a disciple of Jesus is a lifelong learner of Jesus. I think that's just such a good definition. I really wouldn't change that. The way that we articulate it, and you already mentioned it here, is because we know that our culture doesn't understand the word disciple. We say we just want to help people look, live, and love more like Jesus. That's why that's our mission statement. And so discipleship is the process, the what I would say the highly relational process of helping people learn what it looks like to follow Jesus with every aspect of their lives. And I do believe it's relational. I think it has to be grounded in community because that's how Jesus did it. It wasn't just book learning. It was as you go learning, as they're on the road together. And so I really think it's that. And that's why discipleship isn't a program. It's a calling, and it's bound up in community, and there's so many different flavors of it. And that's what's so cool, like looking at how different churches are doing it and learning from each other.
So how in a church like yours, and honestly, I think churches, the size of the churches we're blessed to pastor is probably not going to be the norm moving forward. I heard a recent study, Tom Rainer, I think, that a church worshiping 250 people or more on a Sunday is considered a large to larger church. Like that's about the max. And then you have a multi-site. We're working on multi-site movements as well. And honestly, sometimes it's tough for us because there's, a couple, 3,000, 5,000, whatever people who are in our orbit, in our family. What does one-on-one, even small group discipleship even look like? So how do you even measure it and get the kind of average baptized member to be a part of your discipling movement there at Trinity?
Yeah, I think one of the things, that we have said over and over again here is you can't grow spiritually unless you're connected relationally. That's how Jesus did it. He says, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. So we just have worked really, really hard to say, if it's just you and your Bible and Jesus, you're missing out, because he says if you really want to experience him, it has to be in community. And that's why actually one of the things I find interesting in the gospel is Jesus has very few one-on-one conversations with people.
True.
And when he does, they're usually people who aren't yet his disciples. He's taking time with the skeptics to be like, what are your questions? But the moment they're like, I want to be a part of this, he immediately puts them into community. Even his one-on-one with Peter in John 21 isn't a one-on-one because John's like right there listening the whole time. And so are the other disciples. And I think it's because Jesus knew that for this to be sustainable and for this to be robust, they needed each other. He always was trying to build that community of church. And so that's one of the things that we just kind of hit on. And one of the things that people will feel if you're here at Trinity is if you're just showing up on Sunday, you'll be like, I feel like I'm missing things. And we're like, it's because you are. We've structured ourselves to where if you're not in a small group, if you're not showing up to like 3 times a year, we all get together for training. If you're not on a serving team, you're going to feel like you're not getting the whole pie. And that's by design. And we've said, if you just want to show up on Sunday, you're not going to feel like it's all it could be. And that's because that's the way it's designed. So we are constantly recruiting people for small groups, getting them into small group communities, studying the word. We measure, we do use systems. So we use Planning Center. That's just ours. That's great. They can pay me later, I guess. But what I love about Planning Center is we can actually see how many groups, how many leaders, what the attendance trends are. We can see a new person, what they're getting connected to and whom. And we really, I'm glad we have that system, because it then allows us to do the relationship well and make sure we're connecting dots and nobody's falling through the gaps. And so that's just something that it's been, easily a 20-year plus journey here at Trinity of building that out. But it's a high value that we have.
So good, man. So let's talk mission. Churches that are healthy today, I think, are constantly dreaming and spawning new ministries, starting new things, releasing their people. Could be in a small group or more formal multi-site kind of a context, or maybe it's something that's remarkably new branded to meet a felt need in the community. How do you keep that laser sharp edge on mission and external focus, rather than just, hey, y'all come here and we're gonna do our Jesus thing?
Yeah, man, that's something that we've really been wrestling through recently. So I'm not going to be like we're experts on this, but one of the things that we learned is it's one thing to know your mission. It's another thing to know your mission field. And you have to have both. Like, we had a mission. We want to help people look, live, and love more like Jesus. But the second question is, so who are the people around us that we're trying to help? And what makes this little corner of the world that God has put us unique? What's the fastest growing unreached people group here? And so we actually did the demographic data to look at the demographic trends just right around us. We started to get out into the community and just really walking around and seeing who we're meeting. And for us here, what we found as we did that is the fastest growing unreached people group in our little corner of the world are families with young kids that are highly involved in their kids' lives. They have some kind of faith background, but now it's no longer central. It's gone dormant. They're both working professionals. They're kind of stressed out financially and otherwise. And they have all the creature comforts that you could possibly want. But underneath the surface, there's just not a whole lot of vitality. They know that something's missing, but they can't put their finger on it. Like, we painted that picture, and I said, how many of you know a family like this? And our whole church raised their hands. And I was like, that's who we're called to reach. And so we have structured everything that we're doing around that unreached people group. And the reason why is because we know if that's the fastest growing unreached people group and we get really good at reaching them, we're going to hit a lot of other people too, because everybody knows a family like that. So by being kind of hyper-focused in that way, it actually allows us to be more effective and to evaluate, are we actually seeing these young families show up? Are they getting engaged? Are their kids getting engaged? And sure enough, as we've done that, suddenly grandparents are showing up. Suddenly friends are showing up. Suddenly, cousins are showing. Like, we're hitting more people. It seems kind of counterintuitive. We're hitting more people by being very focused on saying, what makes our mission field unique? And I think you have to be refreshing that all the time. And I think because demographic trends change. So every 3 to 5 years, say, what's changing in our mission field? And how do we structure everything we do around reaching those people? And just being really disciplined about that. We had to stop doing things that weren't reaching those people. And that was hard. Mm-hmm. And so leading our people through that and saying, hey, that thing had a season and it was a great season and we celebrate that, but it's no longer reaching the people we're called to reach. And the mission has to lead us in what we're doing as a church. Yeah.
That's good. I think a lot of churches struggle with that sort of focus because we feel like we're excluding people, but I love that story says, no, it actually, if we get the family, especially today, if we get the mom and the dad and the young kids, I think you're exactly right. We're going to get more of our younger people pre-married, and then, mom and dad, older mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, they probably still have some sort of a spiritual center, and we can grab them back too. So I think it's a very, very wise move. But I want to press in just a little bit, because we're wrestling with, I think a lot of church leaders are, how do you actually ingrain that, posture of gathering that group of people in your culture? Not just how you measure it, but how does it just become, and I know you're talking about it, but get us under the hood a little bit more around the attract. And at the Unite Leadership Collective, we use attract, get, retain, disciple, multiply. So what are the intentional strategies that you're using to attract that respective demographic?
Yeah, so I think what we had to do is we had to say, what do they value? What are the jobs that they're trying to get done, as a family? And the way we find that out is really by asking the families we know who fit that demographic, even those not even in the church, just saying, hey, what do you guys like? What's driving your week? Like, what do you guys care about? And then asking ourselves a question, so how do we meet them there and then help them take a next step? Because I think sometimes we listen to their values and like, well, those aren't biblical values. Well, yeah, no, they're not in the church. But what I love about Jesus is he always met people where they were and then took a next step. So one of the big values that they have is my kids' safety. I want to have a place where my kids are safe. So we place a high premium on safety, to the point where any event that we lead that has food involved, we cut out the top 5 food allergens. Just right off the bat. And then we also on the registration say any other dietary needs, and we will tailor make something for your kid if that kid shows up. And it's good food. It tastes great. We have a couple genius volunteers who care about this issue, and we got them engaged. And one of the things that we started to hear from families is, I bring my kids to your events because I know that they're going to have a great time and be safe. And we're like, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Likewise, they were like, we found out, when it comes to friendship, most of the friends that they make are through their kids. It's actually their kids' friends become their friends. So we're like, so when we do kids events, are there spaces where the adults can interact and build friendships with each other? And so we do a lot of adult programming at the same time as kid programming and try to create those spaces for that. And so we just started to do that and start to say, how do we meet them there and then help them take a next step of saying, hey, if you liked this one event, you should check us out on Sunday, because we do this every week with the kids and they're going to have a great time. And there's a small group for you right then and there with childcare built in. We just started saying, how can we help meet them in what they value, aid them in the jobs that they're trying to get done in a way that then helps them take a next step closer to Jesus and deeper into community. And we're just doing that with every single thing we do, which is why we stopped doing some stuff, is because we're like, that's not helping them. And we want to help them. That's why we're here to do, is help them look, live, and love more like Jesus.
That's wonderful. What do you say to someone who says, man, Trinity Lisle, you guys are just feeding into consumer Christianity. You're in your attempt to just meet people where they are, you're kind of selling out and doing whatever. What do you say to that person who says this is just consumer attractive, whatever? Because again, at the average size is a smaller congregation. They don't have the staff that you have to focus on dietary blah blah blah. I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit. What do you lovingly say to that brother or sister?
Yeah, I think if talking consumerism for a second, if I was simply here to kind of feed their wants, I wouldn't care what the outcome was of what we were giving them. I just care that they're consuming my product. That's what businesses do, right? I don't care that M&Ms are bad for you. I'm a candy maker and I want you to eat them and rot your teeth like crazy. For us, what we're trying to do is we recognize Jesus always went to where people were. He didn't wait for them to come to him. So we're trying to go to where they are and then help them kind of connect into a journey. So for us, we're always asking the question, so what's the next step for them? And how do we help them take another step closer to Jesus? So when they show up and they're like, oh, I'm just putting my kids in kids street so that they learn about Jesus, saying, that's great. But you know what? They're going to come home with more questions. Do you know the story that they're going to be asking you about? They're like, no. And I was like, well, that's why you should probably be in a small group, because we're going to be studying the Bible too. And I want you as a dad and a mom to feel like you're equipped to help your kid grow. And they're like, oh, yeah, I want that too. I was like, good. So we want to help you do that. So we actually care about the outcome. We care about your spiritual life and your growth, and it will push you. But we're going to push you in a way that's relational and supportive. We really do, again, stealing from Mike Breen, we want to balance invitation and challenge in those relationships really, really well. High level of invitation, but also a high degree of challenge, both calibrated well, helping these families to grow and flourish, saying we have a bigger heart for your family, and we believe actually that's Jesus' heart for your family.
Oh, it's so good. We have a ministry called CG Cares, and we focus up a lot around felt needs, an invitation to have felt needs met. And I hear you just doubling down on safety for kids, space for adults to connect, and then in the process, Jesus is met. Let's move on to Multisite. The benefits and the struggles of Multisite. Would you share a little bit of that Multisite story within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod? And there are people within our church, and there are those outside of. There's some recent data that actually says multi-sites have a higher probability of lasting 5 years into the future. I forget the numbers there, but 2 or 3 times greater likelihood within 5 years that community will still be around and hopefully thriving. So there are some benefits to it in the American context, and there are also some unique struggles. Would you share a little bit of that journey, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a journey for us. We're still learning how to do it, and we've been at it since 2010. Actually, we've been at it since before then, because we even tried an experiment even earlier than that and learned from that too. So it has been a journey. I think it's important to define, I guess, what multi-site is, as opposed to like a network model, as opposed to church planting. Church planting is totally independent congregations. Everything is new, unique. They're on their own. You can hopefully support the plant, but then they have to have complete autonomy. A network model has a smaller set of kind of central services. So think like HR, maybe some tools and resources, some of the common DNA, but then a lot more independence. Pastor is still the leader of his congregation. They have a lot of freedom. If they decide they want to leave the network, fine. Bit more decentralized. Multi-site is more highly centralized. Almost everything is the same. We make members the same way. We do small group the same way. We're in the same sermon series. Even it's the same message. And what I mean by that is it's the same message. Like we video preach this one. I know some people have issues with that, but there are a lot of churches doing it, and it's effective. It's that kind of a thing. Now, benefits of that is multi-sites do have the ability to plant faster. And the reason why is because they're not needing to reinvent the wheel. We know our model of ministry. We have all the systems in place. It's really just about finding a growing location, sending a core, and doing what we do best to reach that neighborhood. And so you do see data, like the Unstuck group has done a great job with this, of just showing multi-sites plant faster because you're not reinventing the wheel. The drawback is that only works if you're planting in a community or a place that's similar to the one that you're coming from, because that's what you've learned to do. So the moment you cross like a totally new cultural or socioeconomic boundary, what I would say is you should consider planting a church or going more network-based, in that sense, because you need to be adaptable to reach that community. And that is okay. Just know the runway's a little longer because you're going to have to do some more missionary work. You got to figure out who are you trying to reach? What are the jobs they're trying to get done? What are their, and tailor your ministry around meeting them in those places and then helping them take a next step with Jesus. So there's the benefits and drawbacks. The benefits of multi-site, which I love in addition to speed of planting, is it allows us to collaborate and really leverage our strengths well. We can have people on our staff who they're laser focused on children, youth, and family ministry. We have other people on our staff who are laser focused on next steps, laser focused on small groups. I can be laser focused on preaching and teaching because I've got this team which is helping everybody else do the things. And that is a lot of fun. That's highly collaborative. There's a ton of energy around that. Keeping it aligned is a challenge. And that's because we actually started without we didn't have good definitions when we started. So it kind of became more network-ish, almost 4 independent congregations. So we're actually saying that wasn't working, and it wasn't. We saw a lot of decline when we started to do that. So now we're actually realigning for the sake of getting crystal clear and mobilizing faster. And so that has been hard. I'm not going to lie. That's taken a lot of work, and we're still kind of in the midst of it. But the fruit has been, our staff are like, man, this is so fun. Like, we're so energized because we're working together on this and figuring this out together and developing some of those common best practices together. So benefits and drawbacks, there's no perfect model. That's why we have to be adaptable. So, but this is what we're trying, and it's been a blast.
So we have a vision, 20 campuses in 20 years, and this kind of 3M model for how like the family of ministries kind of work together. And I don't think I've ever shared this on a podcast, but multi-site kind of it can be expensive, but it also can be quick launch, the sending of a team, a micro church expression, which probably is not, if there is any sort of brand, is not Christ Greenfield. It's probably some entrepreneurial venture, not profit to for-profit kind of venture that it has Jesus at the center of whatever that launch is. And then setting ourselves up to, if there are some declining congregations that say, hey, we could come under the umbrella of Christ Greenfield, we have to get super clear on what our negotiables and non-negotiables are. So we walked, shout out to Matt, why am I trying to blank on Matt's name? That's hilarious. I'll get it. Matt helped us with putting together those, and I'm looking up Matt's thinking Peoples. Give me a break. I know Matt Popovitz and then Matt Peoples. Matt Peoples, his missional pathway, it really, really did a nice job in helping us understand that vision and the non-negotiables. And the non-negotiables for us were Word and Sacrament ministries, and a commitment to our mission and vision, the values that we'd put together. Also connected to governance. This is for Multisite. And then the leadership development kind of pathway. And then the last non-negotiable is that it better be contextual. Like, there is this contextual element for how you reach. Even if it mostly looks like maybe a suburban group, you better know where people are working and playing, and you need to be rubbing shoulders with them as well. So yeah, Matt Peoples and his team helped us immensely in that push. Do you guys have any kind of negotiable, non-negotiable language that you're working through right now in your campuses?
Yep. Yeah, we do. The non-negotiables are definitely, Word and Sacrament ministry, our mission, vision, values, non-negotiable. How we make new members is non-negotiable. I mean, if we're one church in multiple locations, we better be discipling people from day one the same way. The series that we're in, we do together, and that also influences how we do small group ministry, expectations for leaders. Those are all the same. We do allow worship to be a little bit more contextual, but even that is, we have common elements that kind of still align, so we work together on that kind of stuff. So we're a little bit more kind of, aligned in that sense. And it really is because DuPage County is a huge freaking county. And we can do this one type of ministry well and have it be effective as we're continuing to plant. But the moment we start to look maybe beyond that, we're going to say we may have to play with some of those negotiables, or we may need to set that site up so that it has a little bit more freedom, and even the possibility of eventually becoming its own thing and being okay with that, seeing that as actually just a gift to the kingdom. So we're open to those conversations, with our locations and talking that through as we continue to do ministry together.
Wonderful. Coming down the home stretch here, let's talk about your own personal rhythms as a leader, as a husband and a father, and how you're striving to set yourself up well to run this race. Because, we're roughly the same age. We probably got 20 to 30, 35 years left of ministry. We'll see how if the Lord gives us health. But what are your daily rhythms, especially, I don't know if people are listening in the season of Lent, your daily and weekly rhythms that maintain health for you as a leader?
Daily time in God's Word. I like to listen to it, whether it's audio or I'm reading it out loud. That's just me. I find that doing that with Scripture is just, I journal as a part of that. I'm just a journaler. It helps me get my thoughts out and process. It's kind of my way of praying, I guess. I work out. I have to work out. I need that physical, recharge. And I would encourage leaders, don't ignore your physical health. it will impact your emotional and spiritual health and vice versa. So do something to just keep yourself healthy. Weekly, we get 2 days off for all of our staff, but one of those days truly is a rest day. I mean, the other day is the day for laundry and shopping and all that other stuff. Truly take a rest day. So take a Sabbath a week. For our staff and myself included, you get a retreat day a month. It's a paid retreat day. You're not in the office. You're not doing work. You're spending a day away, resting, recharging, spending time with God, growing health. We take vacations. I'm trying to get in the habit of doing an away retreat at least once a year. That's several days. So that's just another habit. Those are the things that keep me healthy. The other thing weekly is I'm in a small group. I need a community, and I would say leaders need a community too. You need a community where you're growing and where you are known, where you are loved, where you're being discipled. So get into community and have that place where you can really be invested in. And grow and thrive. So those are just some of my rhythms. We try to place a high value on being involved in our kids' life. So I try to work my work hours to where I can be home when they arrive home, and we at least have dinner together. If I have to go, because there are evening meetings, if I have to go for evening meetings, I try to make sure that we at least had a good little family time before I go back to work, so that my kids know that I'm there and I love them more than I love the job. I mean, I was a husband and a father before I was a pastor. And so God called me to those vocations first. So I do keep those vocations first. But I do think it hopefully helps me be a better pastor and a better leader.
Thanks for modeling that, Nick. That's amazing. Could you talk a little bit about your small group? Is it inside, outside the church? Because a lot of times there's kind of a leeriness of connecting with members, in a real, honest, vulnerable way. So go a little deeper on your small group, if you would.
Yeah, my small group is inside the church. I don't lead it, which is nice, and that's the agreed upon thing. I'm in it with my wife, so we get to show up as Nick and Jenny. Which I think is really important. It's with other young families who have kids kind of same age and life stage as us. Some of them are a little older, some are a little younger, but that's kind of where it's at. And I think I understand the fear that you could be like, man, if I'm vulnerable about certain things, that could get out and get to the church. And so you do have to be wise about that. You have to recognize that there are certain things about your job that you can't share in small group. But honestly, there's probably certain things in everybody's job that they shouldn't share in small group anyways. So just think about it that way more. But I am as vulnerable as I can be with a lot of the people in that group. And I love the people in my group. I mean, we have them over to our house to just hang out on Fridays. We've done crazy stuff like gone axe throwing together and gone out for beer and talked. And I think it just helps them to see me as a person, because I am. And it helps me stay connected to the people we're trying to reach, because I care. So be wise and discerning about that. I be emotionally intelligent. There are some people where I was like, I can't be in a small group with that person, because I always felt like they were fishing around for the dirt behind the scene. I was just like, I'm not going to do that. That's not what I'm looking for. But so it took a little while to find that group. But if you're building a healthy small group culture from day one, you should be able to participate in it well. We have a high degree on things like confidentiality in group life, praying for one another, what we say here stays here. And build that culture to where it's healthy enough where you can participate, where you can thrive in that.
This has been fun, Nick. Thanks so much. If people want to connect with you, how can they do so?
Okay, so I'm the most boring person in the world. I'm on no social media platforms. It wasn't good for my spiritual health, so I got off a long time ago. So if people want to find me, they can go to our church's website, tlc4u.org. My email address is on there. They can email me. They can check out our church's YouTube page, though. It's Trinity Worship on YouTube, and they can see some of what we're doing from like small group training, the sermon series that we're in, what worship life is like here, some of the stories we tell. And that's more about Trinity. That's not really about me. But if they want to occasionally see my face, they'll see me there.
So good. This is the American Reformation Podcast. Thanks for hanging out with us today, Nick. And for those of you who are listening or watching on YouTube or other platforms, sharing is caring, like, subscribe, all of that is very, very useful. And every single week we will have conversations, yes, sometimes within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, but often outside of. We've got a number of amazing leaders leading missionary movements across the world who are lined up in the coming weeks. So stay tuned. This has been a lot of fun. Nick, you are a gift to the body of Christ, and it's a joy to call you a friend and partner in the gospel. Thanks so much, listener. We'll be back next week with another episode of American Reformation. Peace of the Lord. Thanks, bud.
Thanks. Thank you.